Schmidt.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to try to go in kind of rapid fire because we only got 5 minutes and I have questions, but we did get a chance to visit some of us already. Deputy Administrator Melroy, I really appreciate your service. Is the only one here in the room, I think, that's been to space. Raise your hand if anybody else has. I think you're it. So thank you for your service. It's a very distinguished career. In my office, we talked about just how novel these in-person space activities are, and it just presents, different realities. Like there's not a lot of data surrounding all of this right now as a regulatory framework is sort of being grappled with. Could you just talk a little bit about that with those human operations, how certification really does kind of depend on individual vehicles, right? I mean, could you just talk a little bit about that, amplify that a little bit?
Hey, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I really enjoyed our discussion on this. And yes, it does give you a novel perspective. Being in space, I think it's where everything comes together and you actually see how it all works. And actually, NASA has more than 50 years of human spaceflight experience doing things like satellite servicing, building the International Space Station, servicing Hubble, and so forth, using humans. We have new technologies that we're seeing autonomous, but of course the human spaceflight expertise is core with us. So I think one of the areas that we're interested in, we have worked very successfully with the FAA over the last decade on commercial crew. We have come to clarity. We need to protect our astronauts. We would expect any regulator to worry about public safety and to set a threshold and a bar, a performance-based bar. We go much further in protecting our astronauts, and we do that contractually today. And we have worked with our commercial providers to certify the vehicle for the operations that we do. It works very well for us because we have a spacecraft such as SpaceX's Crew Dragon that carries our astronauts to the International Space Station and back. And that we have a long history of how to certify a spacecraft.
And do you think that sort of inures to the benefit of the validity of a learning period kind of approach to all this? Would you agree?
Well, NASA thinks that it is, we would prefer not to extend the learning period, and I'll tell you why. Although we certify these vehicles for NASA operations, we are concerned that spaceflight participants believe that NASA is certifying the safety for their activities as well. And that is not something that we do. We have concerns about that misunderstanding.
Okay, thank you. Well, we can follow up and talk more about that. Associate Administrator Coleman, I do want to ask, can you explain how the White House proposal will be different when the existing FAA regimes that we currently have already sort of struggle to meet statutory timelines? I mean, that's one big concern. So it's a FAA, we want to be very supportive, but it currently struggles with some of those timelines. Could you explain how this would be any different than that?
Sure, thank you for the question, Senator. Certainly with launch licensing, it's a very intense process whereby a number of factors come into play. The complexity of the operation, the familiarity with the applicant with the rules, familiarity with the regulator, with the operation that's being proposed, the quality of the application itself, whether or not the evidence is sufficient enough to demonstrate compliance is there. These are factors that lend itself to the pace at which licensing occurs. These activities that we're talking about for in-space transportation mission authorization are significantly different, if you will, from launch activities and reentry activities that pose an entirely different risk exposure to the public than these activities. For launch or reentry, we rely on flight safety analysis, system safety analysis, trajectory analysis. We're not talking about these types of analyses for these novel in-space missions. They're quite different, and we envision a very light touch approach, very similar to what the Commerce Department would apply for in-space missions that they would oversee.
Okay, thank you. And I had one final question before I run out of time. Mr. Hill, As commercial demands grow beyond the capabilities of Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, do you believe that the memorandum of agreement that you currently have should be expanded to include additional ranges for reentry operations?
I think we need to always be looking at the growth of where commercial is going and ensure that where the Defense Department can support these types of growth areas. So looking at the MOU to see whether that is current or needs to be updated is appropriate as well. Because there are spaceports going around the country. There's also increasing growth at the DoD facilities. And as I said in his opening statement, fundamentally that's good for the nation and fundamentally it's good for us. We just have to figure out how to accommodate those things.
Thank you. Yield back, thank you.
Great.